Welcome, everyone, to the Over Under Movies podcast. My name is Dylan DeAngelis. A little bit of a break from our normal programming this week. Our good friend Jason's on vacation. I'm joined here by our good friend John McDyer, making his return from our Gladiator podcast back in November. John, how you doing today?
Hey, guys. Hey, Dylan.
So, John, we just got out of a screening of the new Alex Garland film, Civil War. This is slated to be one of A24's biggest releases ever. I think it's tracking to make like 25, 30 million or something this weekend. It has a $50 million budget, and obviously, very interesting film to talk about, given the current state of affairs in the United States right now, and just how like politically charged our country is in general. For anybody that isn't aware, Civil War is a film that basically follows a group of journalists as they are making their way through the East Coast while documenting a modern-day civil war that is happening in America. The setup of the Civil War is that President of the United States, played by Nick Offerman, he is a third-term president, which I don't remember if it ever says that explicitly.
Yes, it does.
Does it? I must have missed that part. Yeah, he's a third-term president, and there are several factions like across the country that are like trying to rebel against that. And the most notable one is the Western forces of California and Texas, which is just a hilarious combination of states that could have gone with. But the movie is like largely apolitical, and like that setup that's all it is. It's a setup for a war movie taking place in modern day America. So, John, we just got out of the screening. I'm curious, what were your like overall thoughts on it? Did you enjoy the film? I know we caught a matinee screening, so it was a little early, but yeah, what'd you think of it?
It was good. It was fine. I wasn't enthused by it, but I do get its point. I guess like it has a certain valence to it. Sorry. But I don't know. Yeah, a lot of it, it's in media res and it's apolitical almost, although it's not. Clearly by making it a third term president, that kind of makes it much seem like the president's in the wrong. They try to depoliticize it by doing things like Texas and California together, kind of unrealistic alliance breakdowns.
Yeah, the way that I kind of look at these two different sides is it almost is like the red team versus the blue team. You could think of it like they don't explain in depth what the actual conflict is, what is happening. We don't know the players involved outside of the president.
It's not really even in media res. It's like towards the very end of the conflict. So you're not really sure how long it's gone on. It seems like it can't have been that far, but the side who controls DC loses like pretty spectacularly. Like in the beginning when they're just sitting around all the journalists in a hotel, they're just like, yeah, the Western forces are gaining ground. They travel through the front. By the time they make it to the front, it's like, oh, they've already marched on DC. And then, they just go to DC and see the ending. So it's you're not even seeing you're seeing like the end of the war. I mean, yeah, it doesn't give you any context to how hard fought it was, how long it went on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I should have said it at the top here. We're going to do a full spoilers discussion. It'll be in the title of the episode anyway. But we're doing a spoilers discussion here. Definitely go see the film, by the way, because I think this is a film that I think people should watch only because it allows them to like enter the conversation of the movie more than anything. Because I do think it's worth watching, even if you're somebody who like wholly disagrees with the idea of like doing an American Civil War movie right now. In this current political climate, in an election year of all things, it's an interesting decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a large sense a warning is the intent behind it.
Well, what's interesting about it is because you say it's apolitical, and that's one of the main conversations around this film.
It's again, maybe this is just one's own, political predispositions, but I think the president seems fairly Trumpian.
A little bit. It does not specify whether or not it's a Republican president or a Democrat president.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about it is that, yeah, you've seen movies like this before. It's just you don't see it in America. Obviously, wars in general don't get fought in America. But if this movie had a backdrop of some, like, generic Middle Eastern country...
Well, what's another movie you would compare this to?
We've seen, like, plenty of films coming out about, like, like the Iraq War in Afghanistan. Or, like, a movie that comes to the top of my head is, like, Jarhead, which came out when we were in high school, the Jake Gyllenhaal movie, which basically just like depicts like American soldiers, fighting the war over there. And obviously, I mean, we've seen countless films about like World War II and like Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a different feel from those films in a lot of it, but there's some continuity.
But usually, yeah, because usually you'll see war movies depicted from the perspective of American soldiers, and the American soldiers are the good guys. And maybe some films will be nuanced with it, and they'll say, we're going to depict it from the perspective of American soldiers, and we're not going to say that they're the good guys. They're just Americans. You know, they're the protagonists. That's the viewpoint that we're, showing the film from. And in this movie, it leaves a lot of stuff up to ambiguity. It's kind of just looking at the conflict as flat as possible, and it's doing it through the perspective of journalists, people who are basically just on the front lines with these soldiers and just documenting what happened. Kirsten Dunst plays Lee Miller. She is like the main head journalist. She's in the film, they talk about her being as like a famous wartime journalist. And then Wagner Moura plays Joel. Shout out to Last of Us. I'm sure Alex Garland's a big Last of Us fan. Naming this guy Joel. He looks a lot like Joel from Last of Us. And then Kaylee Spaney, who's like one of the breakouts of this film, I would say. She played Priscilla last year in the Elvis Presley biopic film Priscilla. And then Stephen McKinley Henderson plays Sammy, who's like an older journalist. So it's like a group of 4 journalists who are making their way from New York to D.C. because their intent is to interview the president before the surrender happens. It's actually an interesting twist that I guess we find out like fairly early in the movie that like America is losing this war against the Western forces.
Federal government, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, we should just say off the rip here that this is like wholly fictional and unrealistic. I mean, if we could pause it for a second of what an actual American Civil War would look like nowadays, it literally can't happen. Because this movie does not take into account like state governments at all. Now, there's not a single state in this country that's 100% in agreement on anything to dive into a conflict like this, especially Texas and California. I mean, California is pretty blue, but like
alliances are pretty spurious or unrealistic. It is hard to just imagine. I mean, I guess it's when you talk about something like a civil war, it's such a black swan, like very improbable event. It's so hard to say how it would go down. I mean, it's so hard to imagine just with how like built up it is, just the federal army splitting, which is something, a split like that would have to happen if, California and Texas are advancing on DC.
Well, that's the thing, is that early in the film, we see like what appears to be like guerrilla fighters fighting against like actual soldiers, and they actually get the upper hand despite the fact that the soldiers have the high ground on them.
I don't
know if those guys are Western forces or not.
I mean, they're both uniformed, but
I guess, I mean, they have like vests and stuff on, but they don't have like full like military garb like you see in the fight at the end of the film where they have like the flags on them and everything. I mean, there are like other factions that are like in this fight, and to some extent there's like a Florida group. There is like another faction that's in like the Northwest that isn't like talked about much, but like the main ones fighting against the federal government or the Western forces. The most interesting part of this movie is when you get down to like the civilian element of it. There are multiple sequences in the film where this movie is basically like a road trip film, which is also kind of funny. They're just making their way down New Jersey, I guess, like into Charlottesville. They say you can't go through Philly, so unfortunately we got no Philly footage. But yeah, like there's like one town that they go to where it seemingly appears to be just a normal small town, and they go into like a little dress shop, and it's like a good like brief like moment of quiet in the film. But there's a really great shot at the end of that sequence where Sonny is talking to Lee, and he says, like, look at the top of the buildings, but don't be discreet about it. And the camera, like, pans up so that you can see the top of the buildings, and you can see that there's, like, snipers up on the top of, like, all the buildings, like, looking down on people.
Yeah, and on their way down, they go to a gas station, and there's, guys standing there with machine guns. And then they go out back, and there's 2 guys hanging by their wrists, and they're just like, these are looters, which I guess, it fits with the Civil War, and that there's a certain post-apocalyptic, or war in general, and there's a certain post-apocalyptic element to it. It's like kind of like, zombie land of just like, the breakdown of law and order. Yeah, the 2 worlds that you could compare this to are The Last of Us and Walking Dead is something I thought about a lot while watching this film, where Walking Dead is a show about zombies. It's a world where like zombies killed like most of humanity. However, the zombies are like secondary or tertiary in most of the Walking Dead stories. Like they're there. The zombies are definitely a threat, but the real threat is other humans. And
this movie does a good job at every single time, like, our main characters like encounter another person, regardless of what side they're on. It's irrelevant because they're always a threat. Everybody is perceived as a threat in this world, which I thought is really interesting. Like, there's one, maybe my favorite scene in the movie is the sniper pointed at the house scene, which is like it's like 5 minutes long, but it's just, there's a guy in a big house camped out with a sniper, and there's two soldiers like in the bush trying to snipe him, and Joel is like trying to have a conversation with the spotter for the sniper. And there's just like, shut the fuck up. We're just trying to do our job here. And it doesn't matter which side they're on. That's the whole point, is that it's war. Like, it's just people killing other people. You're just trying to survive.
Yeah, that's a particularly sharp way of showing it.
And then, I mean, the big movie that this film is being compared to, at least from like the previews that I've seen, is that people talk about Children of Men a lot. Great movie made by Alfonso Cuarón, which is another movie about a big, large-scale event happening to humanity. However, it's told through the lens of like people, like a group of people going on a mission, and they're not soldiers. They're just, they're just trying to, survive. And that movie does a very good job at like staying grounded throughout it. And I think this movie kind of loses me a little bit in that like last like 20 minutes or so, when it just becomes a war movie. It just turns into like urban Saving Private Ryan. Like, it's just full on siege on the Capitol. And even though it's like kind of harrowing to see that on film, I think it kind of loses the point of the film a little bit, where I think the point of this film is to depict war through the lens of like the people. And I think the film kind of loses the people a little bit when our main characters basically just become a fly on the wall for the last like 20, 30 minutes of the movie.
It's kind of, they wanted to do a few things. I get they really wanted to show the siege on the Capitol. But yeah, the more kind of like interesting things is the post-apocalyptic, just wandering around America.
Yeah, I will say really
like
great camera work in this movie, and really great just cinematography top to bottom. Really cool practical sets and environments. There's one scene that takes place in like an abandoned like football field and bleachers. They're like covered in graffiti. I'm guessing they just like found those bleachers or something like that. I doubt that they like fully set that up. A lot of cool sequences.
Yeah,
like
I shot like a
really
refugee
enjoyed.
camp.
I think the other main thing that we should probably talk about here is the brutality that's being depicted. That's something I'm seeing a lot in reviews for this film.
So I definitely disagree with the fact that they never showed a single like successful surrender. I think there's a difference between, if you look at Saving Private Ryan, obviously that's a huge point of it. But even Band of Brothers, they show how, soldiers in wartime a lot of times will still just waste POWs or waste, kill soldiers trying to surrender. But it's still there's still a lot of POWs in any conflict. And I think, again, if you look at this as a warning, so this film, the point of this film is in some ways being a warning. I can understand that it's like, okay, you want to say like, guys, you really don't want this to happen here. But at the same time, I disagree that they just never show a successful surrender, because it's almost normalizing that, okay, yeah, war is hell. You never accept surrender. You just fight to the death all the time. Like that's not accurate. Even in modern conflicts, like even in Syria, like Al-Qaeda took prisoners at certain points. I mean, yes, they killed a lot of people too, but I mean, and ISIS is kind of it was its own thing. But the point is like in still in most modern conflicts to this day, even civil conflicts, there's still oftentimes the concept of surrender that they just elide here, like totally, which, I kind of disagree with.
Yeah, like there's a sequence with Jesse Plemons, who just plays a random like dickhead soldier, who they stumble upon him and a couple other soldiers, and it appears like they just wiped out like a civilian population of this like small town or something like that. There's just like a pit of like 30 people. I guess like we're meant to believe like that's a thing that would happen, that like the American military is just like killing off civilians indiscriminately.
I mean, it's kind of, it's where like who knows what could happen. I don't know if in the Civil War there was ever an entire town that was like deliberately just everyone killed. It's the kind of thing of like in modern America, because again, it's like almost like these geographic state factions. It's like, yes, California has a very certain political disposition as a whole. California is considered very democratic leaning, but there's also a lot of areas of California which are Republican. So you do have that situation where you have kind of hostile populations living close to each other. It's still, you could never know until a conflict breaks out whether people are going to take it that far. I don't think it's guaranteed either way, though. But it's not out of the question that they showed that.
Yeah, because I mean, the film does a good job at depicting like different scenarios of what could be happening in the country. The film starts off in New York City, where there's basically something that looks a lot like the George Floyd riots from a few years ago, where it's just a bunch of police trying to like hold back rioters. And then there's a woman that runs in with she's carrying an American flag and just fucking blows everybody up. That scene where there's the American suicide bomber, it immediately hard cuts to a scene in a hotel where all the journalists are like hanging out, having a good time. And I was trying to see, like, is the film trying to...
I think that's the main like personal drama of the film, is just like the tension within a journalist of like, oh, this is like an important thing to do, but at the same time, it's very voyeuristic.
Yeah.
Like
you're a fly on the wall. Yeah. You're not actually involved in the conflict directly.
You're almost a war tourist in a certain way. And, there's a whole thing of, they show, are you gonna take the picture? And then they're just like, yes, of course. But then when the older journalist dies, they show him deleting the photos that they took of him, like, of his dead body. It's like, we're going to protect that. But for everybody else, they take, their corpses, the pictures, of everything else that happens and doesn't. So I think that's kind of, you have the political and the personal, I guess, drama. And the main personal drama is, just wrestling with being a reporter and kind of diving into these terrible situations that you're kind of just extracting photos from and getting out of.
Yeah, that's why, like, Kirsten Dunst is very interesting in this movie, because she starts off as someone who's clearly like hardened from all of like the war journalism she's done, and she's kind of turned off her emotions to it. However, she brings on Kaylee Spaney's character Jessie as like she's like mentoring her basically, and through that she kind of like unlocks like her emotional side more and more as the film goes along. And then by the end of the movie, she has like a fucking meltdown when they're doing the siege on the White House. Yeah. Like, Jesse's taking pictures and like the other journalists are doing their like live shot for the news, and like Kirsten Dunst is like bawling her eyes out, like in the fetal position. And I'm trying to figure out like when that moment happened in the movie.
I couldn't tell if there was like a near miss or something that triggered it, or it's just showing that no matter how hardened you are, you're still gonna have your moments. I don't know.
Yeah, because there's a level of like, hey buddy, get your shit together here, where like they're at the White House. This is the whole point of their mission here, is to go down and get to the White House and interview the president. Spoilers, they don't really interview him. they get to him a bit too late. They immediately execute the president as soon as they see him on site.
He takes a quote of him begging for his life. Yeah. But she shapes up to the end. But then I think, of course, like when they do show, spoiler, Kirsten Dunst's death, it's, you're shown at her like falling through like photo frames.
Yeah, it's pretty ham-fisted, honestly, the whole push the other person out of the way and then they get shot trope. I feel like the movie could have done a better job at establishing the stakes of the world if like maybe killed off like some of the main people like earlier in the movie. That's something that Walking Dead does a really good job of, is that like they just kill off main characters like fucking crazy in that show. Like, it'll just be in the middle of some episode and like one of the guys is dead. They don't come back, or they come back as a zombie.
Yeah.
And it would have been like really like it would have like set the stakes really heavily if if Kirsten Dunst just got fucking like headshot in like a random scene like 2/3 of the way through the movie or something like that, and you've been like, oh shit, like this is real. Because to a certain extent, like you kind of become numb to the violence of this movie, where the press are kind of like bobbing and weaving through these soldiers and they're not getting hit by anything.
Yeah, I mean, the older guy that they take with them from New York is the first one of the road trip crew who dies, and that's like at like the end, like that's like right before they go.
Poor Sonny. Every scene they're just going, "Hey, you're old and fat. We don't want to bring you along because you're old and you're fat." And if we need to run away, you can't run because you're fat.
But it's like in the scene where they're being interrogated by the loose cannon who's just like they've just like massacred a town or something.
Yeah, that's Jesse Plemons. He's married to Kirsten Dunst in real life.
Oh, they meet up with like one of their journalism buddies, and like everybody in that group just gets murdered. The core group has like plot armor.
Yeah, shout out to the two random Asian dudes who clearly the only purpose they had in this movie was to show up so that they could be killed off 10 minutes later and our main cast could stay intact.
So that's kind of very, like main character. And yeah, the core group is like the last ones to...
Which I feel like Alex Garland, he could have taken a page out of another one of his movies, Annihilation, which is a film about a group of women that are making their way towards light. Spoilers for Annihilation coming up here. Sorry, skip like 2 minutes ahead in the podcast. But only Natalie Portman makes it to the lighthouse by the end of it. The rest of them get killed off on their way there. And I feel like this movie could have like really raised the stakes and made it feel more real. Because I think the whole idea of this movie is to try to be some level of a realistic depiction of American warfare. To only have Jesse be the one that makes it ultimately to the president.
I mean, maybe if they could have maybe brought someone with them who dies sooner, because the people that they introduced to you in the beginning don't start dying until the very end. So they could have, if it has to necessarily be.
I've seen some reviews of this movie talking about like, oh my god, like it was so tense in this one part. I was feeling the tension. Like nothing happens to these people. Like that
they have pretty strong plot armor.
Yeah, that first scene in the gas station where I guess like the movie like wants to set up the suspense, like, oh god, these guys at the gas station are gonna shoot them. Like, no, they're not. It's 20 minutes into the movie. What's gonna happen?
Yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, like I've watched so many of these like post-apocalypse stories now that I was ready for anything in this movie. What would have been a really interesting ending to the film would be that when Jessie like jumps out into the hallway and she's about to get blown away, if Kirsten Dunst just like watched it happen to her, or if Kirsten Dunst pulled out her camera and took the pictures of her doing it. Because like she tells Jessie like early in the film, like, listen, you're gonna die if you come down and do this with us, and like it's not my fault if you die.
And the girl's just like, are you going to take my picture? And she's like, absolutely. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. Damn right I'm taking the picture.
And then, of course, she goes and takes Kirsten Dunst's picture, which is, I mean, and that's the whole person. That's the extent of the kind of personal drama they have, is that like struggle of like being a journalist who's covering something terrible, which is, you're recording it for man, it is, something that it's good to have a record being made.
Another thing I really liked about the film was when they're talking about their families, and they talk about how both of their families are living in
a farm
in the Midwest, basically trying to ignore the war happening around them. And you can obviously draw those parallels from there to the people that say like, oh, I don't like to get into politics, and the level of privilege that comes with being able to ignore like major events happening around you like that. Because like if you're an American and you consider yourself like not very political, it means like you're privileged, because like you're not in a demographic where you need to worry about politics to help you like keep your humanity.
I think that for most people, if you know that there's a terrible war going on close by you, I mean, unless you're gonna go and join combat.
What would you do in this situation? Would you become a soldier?
I don't know. I mean, we're both a little. I mean, for civil conflicts, I guess they recruit everyone, but we're a little past soldiering.
Oh, you're an Eagle Scout, right? I was in ROTC when I was younger, so.
But there would perhaps be a militia that would take us if it gets too bad.
The Philadelphia militia.
It would,
but as like a normal civilian, your answers are like either, I don't know, what the fuck do I do now?
Yeah, I think.
Do I kill myself? Do I just like try to go on a farm somewhere and like hide?
But I don't think it's unrealistic at all that people who are just away from the combat zone are just going to try and just keep living a normal life. Yeah. I mean, maybe if they believe it, I don't know, they could, maybe depending on how much war fever spreads, maybe they'll do like drives, during the world wars, they'd have like troop drives, gather provisions to send to the front line or something like, food, etc. I mean, there's certain things that people might participate in, but I mean, I think for the most part that's probably how it would go down. It's just if it's not happening. And yeah, I mean, if you turn on the TV, it's going to just be showing like the worst things you've seen.
Yeah. Another comment that I'm seeing a lot from people is saying like, it's not right to make a movie like this right now.
It's that's why, I mean, it feels it's much like a warning. I feel like, like Nick Offerman's character seems very imperious and like he's taking a third term.
You can say it.
Yeah, it seems like he'd be Trump.
He's Trumpian.
Yeah. So that, that's why it's coming out now. I mean, I guess you could say that's a bit of an intimidation factor. Be careful with, where things are headed.
Be fearful of charismatic leaders, as we would say with our good friend Paul Atreides.
Yeah.
It's tough because I think this movie does a fairly effective job at depicting both sides as being shitty and not great. Like, this movie is not exactly what I would call a happy ending. It's an ending. And like, if they made a Civil War II where like the Western forces are in charge of things, is like America just fixed?
Well,
probably not.
One thing they allude to, which is probably most famous for what happened in Afghanistan, they say, I think in The Hotel, is that, when all these different factions, when the federal government falls, these different factions are going to turn on each other. They're not going to be able to sit down and agree. That's just a throwaway line that's mentioned. So, I mean, and that's what happened in Afghanistan famously, is that the different anti-government factions, once the communist Afghanistan government fell, they just fought each other. It doesn't tell you what's going to happen next. It's very much just a lead up to just showing the president dying.
Yeah, I mean, this movie, it's definitely not like 100% a work of fiction. You could see it as like somewhat of a plausible outcome of the current political climate in America. Is it like probable? No.
Yeah.
But you could see, in theory, like states, especially states that have like military bases in them and stuff like that. Because that's the big thing that I didn't realize until like the end of the movie, when they show that the Western forces are like fucking loaded. Like, they've got the military power to like fight against the federal government.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that it's hard to imagine the military splitting that badly, but I mean, it's kind of, people, it's a civil war. People may be swayed by different political loyalties, even in the military, which again, I think I think it'd be more likely that the military as a whole would just step in and say, okay, we're going to have a, military junta just rule the country before an outright, it splits into, but who knows? That's like, that's something that's almost impossible.
Yeah. I could have,
to know.
I would have preferred this movie to be like, at least like 10% more political. Like, obviously the real life American Civil War had a very like central problem that it was crafted around. Like, slavery was not the only thing that led to the Civil War, but it was like the main thing. And this movie could have done a good, like, just give us a main thing. Give us a main thing that they're disagreeing about. Like, if it's because the president like appointed himself for a third term or whatever like that, and that was the thing that like launched it, then really like dive into that more. Or like, just give us more focus on the president in general. I mean, he seems like, despite the fact that he's like the end goal of the movie, he's really like a background character. You see him at the very beginning and then not again until the end.
I mean, I think I don't know. Like you said, it's kind of, if you want to focus on the people, it's kind of, I mean, to a lot of people's vantage points, the higher political things are going to become irrelevant if as society starts breaking down.
Yeah, that's why I would have almost liked it to have been, if the whole point of your movie is that I want to tell a story about the people on the ground in this otherwise really big, conflict happening, then don't end your movie with like a giant gunfire, blaze of glory, like fight sequence through Washington, D.C., blowing up the fucking Lincoln Memorial.
Yeah.
And then charging in on the White House, guns blazing, murdering everyone in your path until you get to the president, and then you shoot him in the chest. If I was making this, what I would have done was you have them not get to the president. Washington falls before they get there, right? And then because they got stuck on some like other like separate issue that they ran into. And maybe that's like me saying like I would prefer this being like a season of The Walking Dead, essentially, because that's what The Walking Dead is. Like they just run into increasingly problematic factions of humans that they have to deal with for 20 episodes, and then they move on to the next group of like humans that they need to like overcome. But if you're telling the story about the people on the ground, so story about the people on the ground, they become secondary to like the warfare. And the worst, I will say the fight sequences are really good in this movie, specifically we saw this in the Dolby in Philadelphia here, and the gunshots are they're so freaking loud when one gunshot goes off, and then by the end of it, it's like ear splitting how loud it is. And like since we're in the Dolby, like you were feeling it was like do.
It has an intensity to it. I mean, I got to say, I think that I don't know exactly how urban military works, but there are 2 points gripes I had. One is that there's no drones, which if we see modern conflicts, even in Syria, this
is a lot of boots on the ground versus boots on the ground.
Yeah. Like, and especially since Ukraine, that's so much drones, and just like small, tiny ass drones just used to shoot people up. And 2, I am a little annoyed that in like the last sequence, it's very intense, but it's just so one-sided, and I don't know, it's kind of like you're a Hollywood movie and you're like taking out the White House, like show some like pizzazz of just like, it's like, this like high-tech fortress. I don't know, like they just basically walk through they walk through
the front door.
They walk through the front door, and even as they're fighting room to room, there's just like the Western Forces guys just like roll over them completely. It's kind of for combat. There's no even combat tension really.
Yeah, like what the president has a bunker.
Yeah,
that he can go to. But instead he's just chilling in the Oval Office. And, you're right.
So it's not realistic, but it's just not cinematically interesting to me. The fact that like I think that I know personally, I thought the fighting was intense, but it could have been more interesting by at least pretending that parts of it were pitched.
Yeah, the problem is that once they get to that Western Forces base with 20 minutes left in the movie, and they're told like, oh, the government's surrendering, like we're gonna take over DC, and then that's exactly what happens. Yeah. So there's no stakes at that point. The film plays out exactly. There's a
lot of shooting, but I don't know. It's just not. I don't think it's like Saving Private Ryan, because Saving Private Ryan is. I don't know. That's more interesting combat. Like there's like
it is brutal. You're seeing like just losses like crazy.
Yeah, it's like it's like when they're winning the fight, but they're like it's a really hard fight. Like this didn't seem like a hard, to me anyway. It didn't seem like that hard of a fight. It just seemed like okay, they're just walking. I don't know.
Yeah, they're just mowing them down. How do you think this movie is going to play with like general audiences?
Again, a lot of people are going to see it. I feel a lot of people feel this. That our country is very divided. And so, people have been talking about, at least, some people rhetorically have been gesturing towards, a civil war is possible, et cetera. I mean, people thought that especially, after Jan 6 and et cetera, will probably be taken in a somewhat partisan way. I think that it definitely there'll still be a lot of interest in it. I mean, it's telling an interesting story. I mean, to just be like, yeah, this is one version of just like what if shit just really hit the fan.
I mean, it's a difficult movie as an American to take a step back and try to look at it objectively, because we're Americans. You can't like really separate yourself from like the conflicts being depicted in the film. I know like a lot of like liberal people specifically have the opinion of like, yeah, this movie is unnecessary, and if anything, it like will stoke the flames of people who are actually interested in seceding from the government and trying to like overthrow, Biden and, the military and whatnot. But I will say, like, I mean, it's not uncommon for people to be upset with their governments in general. That's kind of, I don't want to say it's the point of the government, but the government's like almost never the good guys from the perspective of like regular civilians. Well, I think it's an interesting concept. I kind of wish that they would have built out like the conflict a little bit more.
I would also say from a partisan standpoint, I could see, because again, I do think the president's Trumpian, a lot of, Republicans would say, like, this is kind of just like,
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if like
anti-Trump warning.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if like Newsmax and like conservative media outlets like look at this movie as liberal propaganda or something like that. Where like, oh, the movie's about America fighting against Trump and murdering Trump.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are just going to see it through a partisan lens.
But yeah, I mean, overall, did you like the movie?
Yeah, it was good. It was, I don't know. Again, like I thought they could have made it a bit more interesting, even just from an entertainment standpoint.
Yeah, I would have liked a little bit more twists. It felt a little chalky to me, like going through it. I didn't feel like the levels of tension that I think like other people did from like reviews that I read of this before going into it. I will say though, like Alex Garland, this is a great like directing job. I really like the camera work. I really like the performances by the actors. I think they're going for it.
I guess I would say that they did do a good, like that whole central like personal tension of, you're trying to report on a war, but it's almost like a little exploity. You're feeling there's a little bit of an exploitative feel to that. They do like flush that out pretty well. I mean, I guess it's kind of, they kind of resolve it in the way that at least I expected it to. Like, I was like, yeah, okay, like she's going to see Kirsten Dunst die. I kind of thought that by like the middle of the movie. It's just like,
you got to kill off the older mentor character.
So I kind of saw it coming, but it was done well.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it's unfortunate. Alex Garland has talked about that this is probably going to be the last movie that he directs because he's kind of become like not interested in directing anymore. He says it's like too much work. It's too stressful. So he wants to go back to like writing films and like producing on films. For anybody interested, we did do an Alex Garland episode a couple weeks ago. We talked about his other films. They're really good. So yeah, definitely check out that episode as well. John, any final thoughts? What's your score like out of 10? What do you think?
I don't know, 5 or 6. It didn't move the needle, but it's not like it wasn't. I can't say it was like bad. Maybe it was just how I was feeling when I was watching it. It was kind of passe.
Yeah, I think this movie is like a solid 7 for me. I definitely think it's a movie I'd recommend seeing in theaters because I think the theatrical experience is pretty good, especially with like the sound design and the cinematography. I really liked it a lot.
They have some intense scenes, definitely.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, especially at the end of like if Alex Garland just wanted to do like a regular war movie, I think he'd do a really good job at it because clearly he has like I think he's got the knack for it, like how to frame it. I wish I honestly like I thought I was gonna go into this movie like being mad that it was apolitical and it didn't give like the details of the conflict. I actually don't care as much coming out of it. My bigger issue is I don't think that he went all in telling this as like a personal story of people enough. I wish that last 20 minutes weren't in the film. I wish that they would have told like a more like personal story with just his main characters.
Yeah, it kind of like he wanted to do 2 things and he kind of...
But I think it's going to play really well for general audiences because, yeah, people love big-ass gunfights on the big screen. But yeah, anyway, that's going to do it for our quick spoilers discussion here for Alex Garland's Civil War. John, thanks again for hopping on the pod, filling in for Jason today. You're in the big seat for anybody watching on YouTube.
No problem.
Definitely check us out on YouTube. We are on all of the major podcast platforms, so 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Pods, all that good stuff. Also check out our Patreon page. All of our Patreons get 24-hour early access to these pods, as well as you get your name at the end credits of every episode. For myself, for John, that's going to do it for this episode of the Over Under Movie Podcast. We will see you at the movies.